Hey guys, Jeremy here with Simple Life. What we're gonna work on today is we're gonna start forging out another kitchen knife. I'm gonna try something different here. Yesterday's video we made that hot cutter and we're gonna use that to kind of set the tang area. I've seen it done in that video, so I figure I may as well try it. And the steel that we're gonna use is this Takefu white paper core, and it's laminated, 22 layers, but it's laminated with just mild steel or carbon. It's not a high carbon steel, it's not a stainless steel. It's really interesting. So we've got our middle layer, our core, which you can kind of see in there. You kind of see that white paper steel core, and that is going to be the good hardenable steel. The rest of it is just kind of jacketed, but it should give a nice layered effect once we etch it. Now, I've got this bar here. I picked it up from Maker Material Supply on eBay. And I'm actually just going to cut out this little last stitch necker because I think this stuff would be really cool, a really neat pattern in the bevels of this little knife. And then also the fact that these last stitch neckers, they don't get handles on them and they kind of get contoured. So I'm hoping that after we etch this, we'll get a lot of really interesting lines coming through this thing. Not sure how that's going to work, but we're going to try it out. And then also what this is going to do is when we cut this out like this, that's going to kind of give us a tip of the knife. And we're going to kind of start with that. We'll come back to about here, I'm thinking, hit it with the hot cut. And then, well, you'll see, we'll kind of open it up, fold it over. I hope I don't wreck this steel. I guess if worst comes to worst, I'll probably just flatten it out. Also, this is fairly thick. It's 215 thousandths of an inch, almost a 1/4 inch thick. Definitely going to thin it out, try and bring this down, draw it a little wider this way. And then obviously get in a distal taper as we start forging. So, let's get on it. Just going to lock this in here while we trace out this template. Now we've got our template traced out. Now one thing that's interesting about this steel, there's an airplane. That was low, and that's not even a crop duster. We had some awesome crop dusters last week coming right over our house. Now, one thing I find really interesting with this steel, they say that in order to craft them into blades, it's usually forged, ground, and hardened. They can also be simply ground and hardened. However, additional forging helps the steel's grain become finer and more homogeneous. I thought that was quite interesting because I've heard people say that if you beat the steel, you get better steel, but they're actually making a claim, and that heat treat paper there, that actually came from the Takefu, from the people who make the steel. And I don't know, it's one of these things that's like, a lot of people say, oh, you need to beat the steel to really give it a good grain and stuff like that. And I don't know if it's just like an old wives' tale, or, you know, some people get caught up on so many of these things they hear, but what actually is happening. I'd like to do a little more research into this. Either way, we're gonna have one knife, the little last stitch necker is not gonna be forged, and we should have nice straight lines in the grain with the different layers. And then when we do this kitchen portion of it, everything goes well, we're gonna beat the crap out of it and we will make the grain finer and more homogeneous. So let's whip over to the bandsaw. I'm not sure if it's gonna handle this steel. I'm not sure how that stuff cuts, but we're gonna give it a shot. Okay, so we've got this little knife roughed out. We're out here in the shipping container, gonna fire up the forge. And I just threw this thing into a little bit of acid just so I could see what the pattern was like. That is really cool. I haven't heat treated it yet, but I really like those lines. You can see them. And then obviously that dark edge there, that is the white paper, high carbon steel core, and it's gonna be really cool. It's gonna like run like a racing stripe right down the middle of that. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna take my piece of SAN MAI. And the one thing I had tried with the hot cutter, and it didn't work out well. I tried it a few different times, but essentially what I was thinking of doing was taking the hot cutter, going like halfway through, and that way kind of isolating this part for the tang of the knife. But when I tried it with a smaller piece, I tried 2 different pieces and I was just wrecking it. And I don't want to wreck this, so I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. Just kind of put it on the edge of the anvil, start hammering it down, start drawing it out. Keep in mind, I'm incredibly inexperienced with forging and blacksmithing. It's so much fun, I love it. Also, I was talking to a gentleman, a friend of mine on the old Instagram, E.T. Snyder. Put a link to his Instagram in the description below. What he was talking about, it makes sense. When they talk about homogenization of this steel, essentially when you heat it up and beat it, you can get carbon migration to some of the other layers. So right now we've only got the 1 layer of high carbon steel, and I guess when you heat it up and pound it, you're gonna get some carbon migration to the layers that are really close to that. So that's probably what they're talking about. So that's kind of what I think is going on. It kind of makes sense to me. But ultimately I think if you just had like a solid bar of 1095 steel, I don't think it makes it any better by hammering it around, right? I think it's when you've got Damascus or layered steel, different SAN MAI, I think that can actually give some carbon migration to the layers that are touching the high carbon content. It'll actually migrate, and that's what they talk about with a homogeneous grain structure. As far as actually getting like a finer grain, I don't know about that. I'm not so sure. I mean, you do all the things like after we forge this thing, then we're gonna do some normalizing cycles to kind of even all that grain out and stuff. So anyways, so let's fire this forge up and let's get to beating some steel. Don't laugh at my technique. All right, so I think we're down to the straightening it out stage. I'm gonna call it good where it's at. And what I'm gonna do now is just kind of do maybe a couple of heats, 2 or 3, just to get it nice and straight, you know, take out any high spots that I can see, and just kind of finesse it so it's easier during the grind. just incredibly hot in here. Even my camera is like freaking hot right now. My anvil is like toasty oats. Woo! Part of me is thinking that forging might be a winter activity for us poor Canadians. All right, let's see how this old girl's doing. Oh yeah, I'd say she's ready. Oh man. Got that forge turned off. It's toasty oats in there. I made a little rack out of metal so I can like stand knives up in there. It works pretty good. All right, so pulled this thing out of the hardening, and it is really nice and hard. And I'll just show you again really quickly. Look at those lines, aren't those cool? I cannot wait to see those once they're acid etched, and then we'll have that racing stripe down the center with the white paper steel. Really excited about that. And then this thing here is fairly nice and straight. I wanted to make a kind of a long, sort of a meat slicing knife, kind of a barbecue knife. This one didn't go as good as the last one that I had forged. This knife right here, and I don't know what it was. It just didn't seem to work as well. This was $10.95, and I don't know if maybe it just moves easier. When I was forging the tang out of this knife, it seemed to come down really nice and easy, but when I tried drawing it out this way, I just wasn't doing what I had wanted it to and what I had experienced with the $10.95. So I don't know, I'm not so sure about that. I have a little bit of dishing on this side, and then when I check it to this side's nice and flat, but this side's just slightest little bit dished, so I might have to actually go for another heat, kind of straighten that out. I'm gonna stare at this, kind of hold it, play with it a little bit, and kind of maybe sleep on it and see what I come up with, see what I think I should do. The one thing that has me a little bit concerned is, if you notice that red part right there, that is actually the white paper steel, and you see it's not exactly centered right here. We've got a big layer of the mild steel on that side, a very small layer on this side. The rest of the blade is fairly well centered for the places that pokes out. But I don't know if that's just kind of with some of the distortion, maybe some of this kind of got curled over something. I don't know for sure, but that would be the one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, possibly. Other than that, it's nice and straight. But yeah, this one didn't leave me feeling all that super excited, or I don't know, this was a lot more challenging than that knife. Anyways, I'm gonna think about this tonight, and then we'll come back, either straighten this sucker out tomorrow, or else we'll just kind of go through our normalizing cycles, and then with that little one, we're gonna go ahead and get that tempered. I'm gonna temper it tonight, we'll get it ground out, and then hopefully throw it in the acid and get it finished up tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Cheers.